All right, it looks like we're mostly back. So, yeah, so the idea is, I don't know if you've ever taken a time to look at your own district's technology plan or anything like that, but these are documents that more and more districts will have published somewhere alongside their mission statements and everything else, just to give their communities a sense of what their plans are with technology for the district and where they're headed and all of that. So it's meant to be a guideline or a framework for technology in the district. So here we are with Newington, and basically we'll just take each of these four areas kind of one at a time. And I guess we can look at each one from two perspectives. Either what evidence did you see in the document that supported that, this particular area of a technology plan was addressed in the plan? Or are there deficiencies, or are there things that you would have liked to have seen in the document that weren't there? Or would you have liked to have seen what was there presented in a different way or organized a different way, or whatnot? So just kind of open the floor to a little bit of analysis here on Newington's plan from these four perspectives. So let's start with the ID light, the needs assessments, audience, goals. What sort of evidence did we see of any of these types of things within their plan? And I think we're small enough that people can just kind of jump in if they wish.
It felt like they did a decent job of creating what their goals were, but what I think was missing is like why were those the goals? Like they were talking about 21st century classroom, and there was no real definition of that. And what's the without a definition, it's hard to understand why they keep mentioning it over and over again. So yeah, I think the why is missing. The goals were in there.
Okay. Anybody want to respond to that or add on to that or contribute to that?
I think in addition to there being a lot of goals, we talk a lot about the goals being specific and measurable. While there's a lot of goals, a lot of the language in there is hard to like recognize how and more like how it's being measured. Like they're using words like we're going to ensure that we do this, or we're going to encourage that students do this, and it just doesn't seem like there's like thought in place for it to be measured. And then even like their assessment of it seemed vague and didn't make sense either.
Yeah, it was a little telling for me that a lot of the timelines in a lot of those charts just said ongoing. Like that, I understand that. I understand you're trying to say that this is something that we are always going to commit to. But if this is a specific goal, you need to have some framework for when you think you're going to reach that goal. So, yeah, that level of specificity of, exactly how we know we're going to meet these goals. All right. What else we have in here for this section?
It all seemed very broad, like across the entire district. Like it never specified these are elementary goals, these are middle school goals, these are high school goals. Like you can't have the exact same goals for a kindergartner that you can have for a 12th grader.
Okay. Yeah. And again, I saw a lot of like to be determined by department kinds of things. So, yeah, sort of a very top level kind of thing. Yeah, I mean they do mention who their audience is. They give the little blurb at the beginning of sort of the demographics of the district and so on, which is good to see. Um, yeah, I mean I actually the first comment kind of that like that needs assessment. what I found missing in a lot of this was that piece of it. And maybe they had done it, and maybe this document they just didn't want to get into the details of that. But a lot of it I was left wondering of, so what is the problem, like what information did you learn that made you say that this was something that the district needed to address? Or are you just trying to jump on some technology bandwagon that, well, everyone else is doing this, so I feel like we need to do it too, kind of a thing? And that's um yeah, for like where did what did they do to determine that these were the things that need to be focused on? Was a big piece of what I sort of came away from with it. um Anything else we want to throw into that end of things?
Um, I mean, this is a little more specific, but there is a blurb under one of their moving forward of things about identifying student leaders, and I felt like it was misidentified as being under professional development. When
Hmm.
typically we see that as like teacher to teacher, principal or staff to staff.
Yeah.
And that is a really cool and good idea. I know, like at least New Britain High School and several high schools around the state have like integration programs where students can, for class credit, like go into kindergarten, preschool classrooms and essentially TA. And but there's no specifics on, is it going to be a program like that they integrate in? Or are they going to identify what level of students to be those technology leaders? So.
Okay. Yeah. um so yeah, just again, it feels like it comes down to sort of some specifics. I think there were a lot of goals across all those charts. For me personally, and maybe you feel differently, but I kind of feel like it would have almost been more powerful to have fewer goals that were a little bit more developed, a little bit more background on where did the goal come from, why is it important that we're working on this goal, how are we going to get there, who's going to be the ones to get us there. It did feel like everything and the kitchen sink kind of all in there without a lot of detail to go into. So but yeah, like, and that would be a specific example of, here's this great idea, but they don't really say, how that's actually going to be implemented. So all right. Yeah, so let's keep going here. So under, the specifics in terms of specific technologies, hardware, software, infrastructure kinds of things, what did we see in the plan in terms of anything along those lines?
I felt like that was a little confusing as well, simply because they say that the Chromebook's going to be piloted in kindergarten and first grade, which is great. But then it said that they're going to use Google and make sure that everybody knows how to use MS Office. So if you're piloting Chromebooks and if you're making sure everybody understands Google, like when are you making the switch to Office? And
Right.
why are you making the switch to Office when everyone across the whole district can just use Google? I didn't understand the need for two different platforms that essentially do the same thing.
Yeah, and there was also, I saw somewhere they talked both about Chromebooks and iPads.
Well, then they
But
also say that bring your own device opportunities in high school, and so now you have to make sure that everything is compatible for like PCs and Macs across the board. And if you're
yeah,
not teaching that, like in kindergarten and first grade when you're piloting it, if you're giving out Chromebooks, when do you begin teaching Apple? Because there is a difference in the systems.
oh sure, yeah. Yeah, so it was a little confusing about exactly. I mean, they definitely were the one-to-one was definitely a push, and that shows up, but not really. What do they mean by one-to-one? Are all students in the district using the same type of device? Are they saying these levels are using this type and then these levels are using this type? um, so yeah, again, some specificity along those lines.
Yeah. I would say it's very vague, and it makes me wonder because they do say like they use iPads like specifically towards special education stuff. If they're piloting K1 is like touchscreen Chromebooks versus your typical like Dell 3100s that most schools get, or what? And then just kind of piling on with the bring your own device opportunities in high school. That's an entire can of worms between privacy concerns and with actually making a secure infrastructure network in the school system
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah,
From a
and
security standpoint.
yeah. And again, to be fair, this came out in 2019, and that seems like a lifetime ago, but at that time there were a lot of districts that were kind of seeing a BYOD as a way to get a one-to-one happening in the classroom without the school having to be the one to supply everything. The last 2 years have probably taught a lot of these districts that BYOD is not really the way to go, having to suddenly sort of jump into the deep end with that. But yeah, I think that's, it does seem like they had, and this maybe goes back to the needs analysis, or really kind of knowing what your goal is. It seems like they don't have a really clear idea of what the goal is they're trying to address, because they have all these different options that they're talking about. And you would think if they're trying to solve this problem, they would have figured out which of these is the best solution for that and said, we're going to commit to this solution. It's going to be Chromebooks across the board and Google Suite, or it's going to be, iPads, and we're going to use Apple as our ecosystem. Um, but the fact that there are sort of all of these irons still in the fire kind of shows that they didn't, either they're still leaving those decisions up for the future, or didn't really take the time to figure out where they stood on each of those. So, yeah. So kind of a lot of this idea of specificity seems to be coming back quite a bit here. How about the training piece?
I think the most obvious question is when on earth are they going to find all the time to send everybody through all this training? Their principals, their curriculum directors, their teachers, like literally every single staff member was listed, and it is like an overwhelming amount of training.
Okay. Anyone want to pick up on that, or?
I was just looking at it and being that all the training is for the teachers and maybe that are the adults, I guess, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. But I just wonder, and I don't know because I teach high school now, but does anybody teach like computer skills to kids, or do we just assume that they come ready to do that? Because I know I learned how to use the computer and type because I took a class. I mean, my kids are still punching and pecking, and like, can you put a table in? And they're like, I don't know how to do that because nobody teaches that because we just assume in this like information age everyone knows how to do it. So I just feel like we've gone away from taking like, typing class or computer class, or I don't know, just so I just feel like that needs to be back into some of these plans because we give these kids this technology and they know how to go on YouTube, and that's great, and they know how to search that stuff, but they don't know how to use it in a meaningful way to access educational tools.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I know in elementary schools in my district, they don't offer those computer science classes, what they used to be called when I was in elementary school. Though they were basically just your basic how to use Office and that kind of stuff. But like a lot of it gets taught when it comes up by the STEAM teachers or by me in my art room or by a couple of the grade level teachers that are on our school's like building based tech team.
Yeah.
It's a little haberdash almost.
Like it's incidental learning or what have you, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
When it comes up.
Yeah, that's how it is. Yeah.
I agree. We have no more technology education courses at all. Like, I don't even really understand why we have computer labs, because everything is a one-to-one device, and we just have a couple rooms in our building that are full of perfectly good computers but nobody teaches those courses, and the kids don't need them. The computers, they need the courses, they just don't need the big old computers.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, and the one-to-one it is a bit of a catch-22 because like this term digital native, like we talk about how this generation is all digital natives. And the assumption is that that means that they know how to use technology sort of innately. But that's not true. I mean, any more than it's true of any other skill that we learn for anything else. You know, we all grew up, with, surrounded by books, but it wasn't, we didn't just innately suddenly know how to read. Like it was a skill that had to be taught. So that is something that the digital native means that they have never known an existence where technology was not driving a good portion of what was around them. That doesn't necessarily imply that they know how to use that technology efficiently or well, or that they don't need to be trained in it. So, yeah, I mean, to be fair, usually technology integration plans are more about the teachers, the teacher training. But especially with how broad this particular school districts is, it does seem like that that would be included if they're talking about training. Um, but yeah, there was, I mean, the first impression looking through it is exactly like, oh yeah, they've got training all over the place. They're talking about bringing in these specialists and setting aside this and that. But yeah, in terms of a practical like calendar of when and how will that actually all happen? I mean, we can barely get our grades in at the end of a marking period, let alone, be able to set aside day after day to do technology training. So, and maybe that goes back again to this idea that they have all these ideas in this, and maybe it would have been better to pick a few more targeted, more impactful goals and really dig into those and set up those. But looking at this plan, I feel more and more, like this is everything in the kitchen sink, and in the end, how much of it is actually going to get realized? It looks good on paper. It looks like there's a lot going on, but I'd almost rather see 5 things written down and a very specific plan for those 5 things than 50 things that are all say ongoing, everybody, and then what happens from there. So, all right, yeah, let's finish this up, and maybe maybe at this point we've kind of developed our theme for this. But in terms of management, budget, maintenance, timeline.
There didn't look like there was a budget or timelines. There was a lot of plans for like there's a lot of plans to develop plans for maintenance and replacement, but it didn't seem like there was any actual plans. And yeah, I didn't see anything about a budget or any specific timelines.
Yeah, it was
One
interesting.
thing,
Oh, go ahead.
oh yeah, I was just gonna say one thing in regards to the management is I noticed an emphasis to analyze the redundancy of resources, and I thought if you're going to kind of cast a wide net, at least you're going to attempt to go back through and ensure you haven't duplicated any sort of software.
Okay. Yeah. And again, like when you have so many irons in the fire, it almost seems like that's almost a recipe for for developing redundancy as opposed to getting rid of it. If you've got all these different initiatives going on. Yeah, I mean, we already talked about the use of ongoing as a timeline, which is not really a timeline. That just means that you aren't willing to commit to reaching anything at any specific time, which seems a little bit problematic to me.
There
Um,
is one mention of investigate and apply for grants and other funding sources, which actually is a little concerning because then that means that perhaps they don't know where the money is going to come from to make this all happen.
Right. And there's no indication that they know how much funding they need. Like, oh, we're just going to go out and find a bunch of money and then we'll see what we can afford with that. Like, it does seem a little backward. There was one mention near the top of the document, which is interesting because I think they do specifically say something like, the purpose of this document is to aid in budgeting. And I mean, they actually specifically mention budgeting. And the only aid I can see is that if I was a business office of a school district and given this, I think I would panic because to achieve everything here, I don't know what it costs, but it looks like it's going to cost the district, hundreds of thousands of dollars to pull all of this off. So, yeah, and then yeah, finding funding. I mean, that's a good goal, but you can't really look for. I mean, nobody's going to give you a grant if you can't tell them what the grant's being used for, how much you need, how it's going to be used, how you're going to, justify its use. So it does feel a little backwards there. So in any case, to defend Newington a little bit. I obviously I'm not from Newington. I'm not part of their tech thing. This document they may have purposefully set out there as kind of like, here is our big umbrella. This is our idea of everything that we want to work on. But I don't really get a sense from it that there were even plans to then take pieces of it and develop them further. That a lot of it does just seem to be, here's a great idea, we're going to throw it at the departments and they can figure out what they're going to do with it, as opposed to anything specific. So I do feel like maybe they just saw this as a blanket sort of almost a mission statement kind of a thing, but there's enough specifics in it that if it was truly just the overview, it should have been 3 pages long and just set out their big vision. The fact that they do get into all of these specific bullets would seem to indicate that they've had discussions about them. And it just feels like if they made it that far, there should have been a further discussion. And it in the end, it felt like a lot. Coming back again, give me 5 really well thought out, really well supported goals. Let's get those 5 done, and then we can move on to the next 5. But setting out this kind of a thing, just to me feels like there's a bit of a recipe for disaster. It would be interesting, and actually, if we did have somebody who was in Newington, I would have been interested to pick their brain a little bit and see like how this actually found its implementation over the past couple of years, or whether it is just words. But I don't know. We'd have to find somebody from Newington. Actually, I do know a teacher from Newington. I should check up with him and see. So, but in any case, so this is the idea: is these should be in place when you're looking at bringing technology into the picture, either through an instructional design or for a school or for a department or for a grade level. But in terms of our application and the thoughts for this course is, again, nobody's writing any technology integration plans. You can do that in the spring if you take 530. For the purposes of this course, in your instructional design plans, and this will really be like the only new little piece that we haven't already done through one of the previous phases, would be only to take it as far as to figure out whether even a technology integration plan is needed for your instructional design. I think a number of you are doing design plans that don't really involve technology in a significant way. I mean, beyond like, students will be typing up things in Word or something like that, and that's fine. But if in your instructional design you identify that there is a piece of technology, either hardware or software, that is going to be more central to your instructional design, then I'm just going to be asking you to add in that you address that just from the standpoint of before this design gets implemented, we will want to complete a technology integration plan that will look at what is the best technology to do this kind of a thing with the students in order to achieve these goals. So it's, maybe a paragraph or two or a small section only as far as showing that that a technology plan should be developed if this instructional design is going to be implemented in the future. But I'm not going to be asking you to actually develop the technology plan for this. So I just wanted to go as far as giving you a sense of what they are, the kinds of things to look for when you're looking at technology integration plans, and then just to give a little bit of thought to your own instructional design projects, and just think about whether you think that a technology plan would be necessary down the road if the instructional design was going to go forward. Yeah, Nicole, go ahead.
Would you use something like that for something like assistive technology if that's based in someone like IEP? Like I know I wrote some of my goals to say like given accommodations in an IEP. So some of my kids use those sorts of things. Is that included in that sort of a plan?
It might be. Yeah, I mean, the question would be whether you know ahead of time specifically what adaptive technologies are needed. Um, but it could be just more general. I mean, in that case, you might say that I know that in this plan we will need to be addressing students with a range of adaptive needs. So we would want to develop a technology integration plan that would identify appropriate technologies to be brought into this plan. So you may not know right now specifically what type of adaptive technologies, but if that's going to be, if the use of technology in order to make the material available to those students is going to be key to your instructional design, then you would want to acknowledge that that would need to happen at some point.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so let's wrap up the evening. There's not much more to talk about. In terms of homework for next week, production mini projects, I think most, if not all of you, have gotten both of those in. If you haven't, just try to get those wrapped up because you don't want that hanging over you as we start heading into the final stretch. The big thing is the ID project phase 3 and 4, which was assigned last week. And again, I say this in the assignment page, it looks like a lot on the page, but most of the work, or at least the outlines of the work, are already in place because you're pulling from your assessment conversations that you had the week we talked about assessment. You're pulling from the production mini projects, especially if you use some examples from your own plan in those mini projects. You pull from that. So it's more just kind of putting it all together and getting that submitted. And as I said, my promise for myself and for you is that if as those get submitted, I will try to turn feedback around. I shouldn't say I will try. I will turn around feedback within 2 days of submitting so that you have that information by the time we hit next week and you're starting to put together the final document. So you'll have gotten feedback on phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 as you're working on that final phase. So just start to get those in. And sorry, I just saw a couple things come in chat. So there's that. The only new thing, and I'm hoping that I don't want to overwhelm anyone. I just wanted to have at least one little follow up with the technology integration plans. Is I do have this will be the final forum activity for the course. So even if you don't have your responses in by next week, we can keep this one going out to the end. And it's basically about technology integration plans. I wanted to make it apply to you or as useful as possible. So there's two paths here. The idea is for you to take a look at, if you work in a school, look at your school or your school district. If you don't work in a school, wherever you do work, whatever company or business or whatever situation you work in, and first of all, try to identify whether that school or that business has any kind of a technology plan in place. So, look on websites, talk to central office people, talk to business office people, see if there is an existing technology plan. If there is, then you're going to follow what I'm calling path A, which is to kind of do what we just did with Newington's. Just look over whatever that plan is and just come up with a paragraph or two about your initial thoughts about it. Does it look like it contains what it should contain? Are there things that you see that maybe could be improved on or that are missing? If you have been on the receiving end of a technology plan in your own school, do you think it actually was implemented well? Or this is always interesting when a teacher has no idea whether their school has a technology plan and finds out there is one, but are like, I never even knew we had this thing. Like, okay, that's good to know. So, if you can find one, then that kind of is your job, is to look at it and respond to it. On the other side, you may find that your school or your district or your business or your whatever doesn't have any established technology plan. In which case you're going to have to kind of be more reflective and sort of speculate on how you think that has impacted your school or your classroom or your place of work. Like, do you think you would have benefited from having a technology plan in place? How would that have changed what you do? Maybe you feel like it wouldn't, but so because I can't guarantee that everybody has a technology plan wherever they work, I wanted to make sure that both scenarios were accommodated in terms of this final forum post. So just to kind of get an idea of what you are currently working with, and it may not be much or it may be a lot, and just kind of reflect on that a little bit, incorporating what we talked about in class and so on. And then it is a forum, so come back and respond to people's posts as you see them post. If you have similar experiences as other people or different experiences or whatnot, and we'll just keep those conversations going. But this will be the final forum for the course. So really, in terms of remaining work, at this point, the only thing that hasn't been assigned is that final ID document, which is what I will talk about next week. But we've got phase 3, 4. We've got this final forum, mini projects if you haven't wrapped those up yet. And we're really heading into the final stretch here. So, any final thoughts, questions, concerns? All of this is here in the Moodle for review if you need any follow-up on them. So next week will be a brief class just to go over the final ID projects. The following week will be our final meeting just to wrap up the course. And then it'll just be about getting projects in to wrap everything up. So, all right. That's all I got. It is 8:59. Have a good Thanksgiving. Relax a little bit, hopefully. Decompress a little bit. Get away from things for a little bit. And may see you in a week. So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good weekend and a good holiday, guys.